A waitress greets a Mafia kingpin. "Sir, my grandma has the same tattoo as you." The shocking truth. Now, the Azure Quill was a restaurant built on impossible glass, perched over the Santa Monica surf. It was the kind of place where money came to whisper, not to shout. The sunset bled across the Pacific, staining the white tablecloths orange, then purple. The clinking of ice in heavy glasses was the only percussion allowed to accompany the muted jazz trio sighing from the corner. Lila Mora moved through this expensive quiet like a ghost in a black apron. She was efficient, invisible, and counting the seconds until her double shift ended. Then he arrived. He did not walk in. The room simply rearranged itself around his entrance. 3 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits followed. One stayed at the door, his eyes scanning the exit. One scanned the bar, his hand never far from his belt. And the third, the center of their gravity, was shown to the corner booth, the one with a clear view of the entire room and the dark ocean beyond. The manager, usually composed, hovered nervously before retreating. This was Lila's section. She approached, her notepad ready, her professional smile fixed. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with—" He turned his head. His stillness was absolute. He had not been looking at the ocean. He had been watching the reflection of the room in the glass. His eyes were not cold, but they were heavy, the color of the ocean floor right before a storm. He wore silence like armor. As he shifted to face her, his left cufflink, a sliver of onyx, caught the light. His sleeve pulled back just enough. Lila stopped breathing. It was not a blur of ink or a crude design. It was a precise, delicate chain of crescent-shaped comets, wrapping around the bones of his wrist like a constellation trapped on skin. The words left her mouth before her brain could stop them. They were too loud in the sudden hush. "Sir, my grandma has the same tattoo as you." The world stopped. The jazz trio missed a chord. The clinking of ice ceased. The only sound was the sharp, violent crash of a real wave against the pilings below. Cassian Vieri, a name never spoken at the Azure Quill, though he owned the building and the 3 blocks surrounding it, did not move. The 2 men flanking the booth, however, moved instantly. Hands simultaneously dipped inside their jackets, their weight shifted forward, their expressions flat, ready to erase the girl who had dared to see the unseen. But Cassian Vieri did not tense. He simply lifted his index finger, a half-inch movement from the table, and held it there. The hands retracted. The 2 bodyguards became statues of tailored menace once more. Cassian looked at the girl. She was young, pale, and clearly terrified. Yet she had not run. Lila's hands were shaking, making the complimentary breadbasket on her heavy tray rattle. I have a picture. I'm sorry, I've never seen another one." She fumbled for the cracked phone in her apron, her fingers slipping on the screen. Cassian waited. The silence stretched, becoming an interrogation. She finally found the image, a scanned, black and white photograph. She held the phone out, her arm trembling. Cassian did not take it. He leaned forward, just enough. The photo showed a young woman, beautiful and defiant, leaning against a vintage convertible in what looked like the desert. Her hair was wild, her smile sharp, and on her wrist, identical in every detail, was the crescent comet chain. Cassian Vieri's eyes, which had been passive, darkened. It was not anger. It was the deep, sudden recognition of a debt long buried, a curse returned to life. The manager, sensing disaster, scurried over, his face slick with panic. "Mr. Vieri, my apologies. Is there a problem? Lila, what are you doing?" "She was just leaving," the manager hissed, trying to pull Lila away by the elbow. Cassian spoke. His voice was gravel, quiet, yet it cut through the room like broken glass. "Leave her." The manager froze, then vanished. Cassian's gaze returned to Lila. It was sharp now, analytical. He was no longer a customer. He was the head of the low-tide syndicate, and a ghost had just walked into his restaurant. "How old are you?" he asked. 22, Lila whispered. Your grandmother, her name. Lila swallowed, the weight of her heavy tray suddenly unbearable. She looked down at the tattoo on his wrist, then at the photo on her phone, then back to his eyes. Her chin came up, just a fraction. Her name is Celeste Mora, but she changed it, many times. A shadow detached itself from a nearby table. A nondescript man in a rumpled suit, who'd been nursing a single whiskey for an hour, placed his cash on the table and walked toward the exit. As he passed Lila's unattended service station, he dropped a small, plain white envelope onto her tray. Lila glanced down. It was standard business stock, but on the corner, stamped in faint blue ink, were 3 letters WIB. She flipped it over, written in hasty, urgent block letters, "Don't let him touch you." Her blood ran cold. She looked up, but the man was gone, melting into the valet line outside. Cassian had seen the exchange. He watched the door the man disappeared through, his expression unreadable, before turning his full attention back to Lila. He stood abruptly. The tension broke. The jazz trio, sensing a reprieve, nervously resumed playing. Cassian pulled a thick roll of cash from his pocket and dropped it on the table enough to buy the restaurant, let alone the meal he never ordered. It was not a tip. It was an anchor, a claim on the truth. He paused beside her, close enough for her to smell the faint, expensive scent of salt and vetiver. "Your shift ends at 11, he said. It was not a question. "Wait for me at the service exit. I need to hear what your grandmother told you. I need to hear her story. Through you." He and his men were gone, leaving a vacuum in their wake, the pile of money gleaming on the table, and Lila Mora holding a photograph, a warning, and the sudden, terrifying weight of a past that was not hers. The alley behind the Azure Quill smelled of bleach and old fish. The 11 o'clock marine layer had rolled in, thick and cold, swallowing the sound of the nearby surf. Lila Mora's apron was stuffed into her bag, the white envelope from the WIB agent digging into her hip. She clutched the strap of her bag, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the single, flickering halogen light that illuminated the dumpsters. A car door opened in the darkness. It was not a car that arrived. It was one that had simply been waiting, a long, heavy sedan the color of a moonless night. It had been parked in the red zone, invisible, its engine a vibration rather than a sound. Cassian Vieri sat in the back, the door held open by the man who had guarded the restaurant entrance. The interior was dark, but Lila could see the faint, sharp outline of his profile. "I am not going to ask you twice," he said. His voice was calm, carrying easily through the damp air. Lila looked back at the employee door, the safe world of time cards and burnt coffee. Then she looked at the dark, open maw of the sedan. She stepped off the curb and slid onto the plush leather. The door closed with a heavy, soundless thunk, sealing the rest of the world out. The car moved instantly, merging with the Pacific Coast highway lights. The partition between them and the driver was thick, dark glass. They were alone. "My bag," Lila said, her voice shaking. She pulled her worn messenger bag onto her lap and unzipped it. She retrieved a small, dented tin box, the kind that held holiday cookies decades ago. "I only have what she left, what she couldn't burn." She opened it. The contents were scarce. A faded bus ticket, Barstow to Los Angeles, a single silver earring, and a piece of paper. Folded so many times it was soft as cloth, the edges torn. Cassian took the letter she offered. He didn't turn on a light. He read it in the intermittent flash of passing headlights. It was part of a letter. The ink faded to brown. It spoke of fear, of running, of a comet pact that had been broken. It was signed with 2 initials, A.V. "Aurelio Vieri," Cassian said, his voice flat. He stared at the initials, his face cast in shadow. "My uncle, my mentor, the man who taught me how to read a room, how to weigh a man's soul." He looked up, his eyes finding hers in the dark. In the late 90s, he vanished. He was with a lounge singer from a small club in Long Beach. They said she was a ghost, a nobody. Her name was Celeste. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. The tattoo, Cassian continued, his voice low, was not meant for children in restaurants to recognize. It was an oath. The Marina cartel was purging its own. Cleaning house in Long Beach, the Comet Pact was a promise of mutual protection. If one fell, the other would burn the world down to find out why. She never burned anything down, Lila whispered, thinking of the tiny, sun-scorched house in Yucca Valley. She ran. She lives off the grid. She hates the news, hates hospitals. She pays for everything in cash. The car was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the expensive tires on pavement. She ran, Cassian said, because she thought he was a traitor, or she knew he was dead. He turned to look out the window at the dark, churning ocean. We were at Pier Nova, 1999. There was an explosion. The fire was so bright it turned night into day. His hand, the one without the tattoo, clenched into a fist on his knee. They said Aurelio set the charge. They said he sold us out to the cartel, that he tried to kill my father. He was labeled a traitor. I have trusted no one outside of my own blood since that day. A memory, cold and sharp, surfaced in Lila's mind. A hot desert afternoon. Her grandmother filtering water through a cloth, her eyes scanning the horizon. She told me, Lila said, her voice barely audible. She warned me. She said, Lila, this world is full of ghosts. If you ever meet another soul with that comet streak on their skin, you run. But if you can't run, you ask them one question. Cassian turned his head slowly. His eyes were intense. What question? Why are you still alive? The question hung in the air, an accusation and a plea. Cassian stared at her, the muscle in his jaw tightening. He did not answer. He did not need to. The question was meant to wound, and it had... Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. He did not pull out a weapon or a wallet. He produced a small, black plastic object, a micro-cassette recorder, 90s tech. He held it out to her. We found this in one of his storage units, years after the fire. We thought it was meaningless. Lila took it, her fingers brushed against a faded, typewritten label taped to the side. 2 sets of initials, stark and clear, A, V, plus C. This, Lila breathed. This was hers. It was in a box with her name on it, Cassian confirmed. Lila's thumb found the small, worn button. It was stiff, but it clicked. She pressed play. There was a hiss, a pop. Then, the unmistakable, deafening sound of torrential rain hammering a car roof, the squeal of tires on wet pavement, a man's voice, rough and desperate, breathing hard. The engine's flooding. They're still on us, and then, Celeste, keep your head down. There was a heavy thump, like something hitting the car, followed by a crackle. Then the voice again, closer to the microphone, a raw whisper. If anyone hears this, the truth didn't die at the pier. The truth. A sharp click, and the tape ran out, ending on a half-breath. The silence that flooded the car was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Lila looked at the cassette player, then at the man beside her. The story was not dead. It was sitting in her lap, and it had just woken up. The Sable Lantern was a coffee shop that existed in defiance of the Santa Monica sun. It was 3 p.m, but inside, it was a permanent, bruised twilight. The only light came from the deep purple neon sign of the bar next door, which bled through the windows and stained the air. Cassian Vieri was already in the back booth, a figure of impossible stillness. He did not look like he belonged in a place that smelled of stale espresso and lavender soap. Lila slid onto the cracked vinyl bench opposite him, the micro-cassette recorder feeling like a brick in her bag. She placed it on the table. The purple light caught the faded label A, V, plus C. I listened to it all night, Lila said, her voice low. She hadn't slept. I ran the audio through a filter on my laptop. The rain, the chase, that was just noise covering the real recording. She had pressed her headphones tight to her ears, listening past the squeal of tires and the panicked shouts, and underneath it all, she found it, A different layer. A calm, clinical conversation. Recorded over. "Play it," Cashin said. Lila pressed the small button. A hiss. Then a man's voice. Professional and detached. Verifying designations for the transfer. Comet/01, Aurelio Vieri. Comet/02, Celeste Mora. The WIB liaison confirms the framework. All assets will be moved to legitimate channels by fiscal quarter end. Cassian did not move, but the atmosphere around him turned to ice. The uncle he had been taught to mourn as a traitor, the man who supposedly sold them out to the Marina cartel, had not been a traitor at all. He'd been a reformer. They were working with the Western Integrity Bureau. Lila translated the dry terminology. They were trying to get out, to make the Empire clean. The purple light cut across the table, illuminating Cassian's wrist. The crescent comets seemed to glow. Lila instinctively covered her own bare wrist, a sudden cold empathy for the grandmother she barely understood. 2 generations, 2 sets of lovers, marked by the same impossible choice. A flash, sharp and white, exploded from the street, cutting through the purple gloom. Lila flinched, her hand flying to her chest. Cassian's eyes were already fixed on the sidewalk. A figure in a dark hoodie was lowering a camera with a long lens, already turning to run. Cassian tapped his phone screen twice, a silent command. From a parked car Lila had never noticed. One of his men, the one who had guarded the restaurant door, was instantly out and sprinting, moving with a predator's economy. They watched the chase. The photographer was fast, slipping through the afternoon beach traffic. The bodyguard was faster, but the target was smarter. The figure disappeared behind a large, idling, refrigerated truck. And by the time the bodyguard rounded the corner, he was gone. The bodyguard returned, his face grim, giving a sharp shake of his head through the window. "They know," Cassian said. It was not a guess. "They know the tape is in play. They know you found me." He turned his full attention to Lila. Where is she? Not Yucca Valley, the truth. Lila felt the envelope from the WIB agent digging into her hip. The memory of his warning, "Don't let him touch you." But the man in the alley was gone, and the man with the camera was real. "If they are hunting for Celeste," Cassian said, his voice dropping, "they will find you, and I cannot protect a ghost." "She's in Santa Fe," Lila said, the words rushing out. "A private clinic, long-term care. She's sick. Mr. Vieri, she's registered under the name Sarah Montoya." Cassian nodded once, pulling out his phone. "My people will be there tonight." "No," Lila said, louder than she intended. Cassian paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. "No men in suits, no dark cars. That's a target," Lila insisted, her voice shaking but firm. "It just puts a spotlight on her, and I won't be in your debt. No blood debt. I am not. I'm not part of your world. I am not bait." Cassian looked at her, a long, assessing gaze. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps respect, crossed his features. "Fair terms," he said. Her phone vibrated on the table, loud in the quiet cafe, a text from an unknown number. She read it, and her blood turned to ice. "Don't trust Vieri. He was on the pier. He shot A.V." It was signed, simply the Santa Monica blind musician. Lila's breath caught. She looked up from the screen, her eyes wide with a new, terrible suspicion. She slid the phone across the table. Cassian read the message. His expression did not change. "The musician, as he said," sliding the phone back. "He's been a fixture on the pier for 30 years. He sees nothing and he hears everything. He's an informant for hire, the safest kind." "Is he lying?" Lila demanded. "Were you there? Did you shoot your own uncle?" Cassian looked at her. The silence stretched, filled only with the hiss of the espresso machine. He did not deny being there. He pushed the table slightly and stood up, not to leave, but to half turn in the booth. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt under a light jacket. He pulled the hem of the shirt up, just a few inches, exposing the skin below his left rib cage. Lila gasped. It was not a new wound, but it was a deep one, a puckered, violent starburst of scar tissue, pale against his skin, the unmistakable geography of an old bullet wound. "I was 20, Cashin said, his voice raw, different from the smooth, controlled gravel she was used to. "Aurelio brought me. He was going to introduce me to her, to Celeste. He said the Comet Pact was the future. Then the pier exploded." He let the shirt fall. "The cartel was waiting for us. Someone had tipped them. Aurelio pushed me behind a stack of crates, but the shot came through. It was meant for him." He tapped his side. "I took this. When I regained consciousness, the dock was on fire and he was gone. They told me he lit the fuse and ran." The weight of his scar settled between them, a truth heavier than the lie on her phone. Cashin threw a wad of cash onto the table. "We're leaving. Now." He guided her not through the front door, but the side exit into a narrow alleyway that smelled of ozone and wet cardboard. They heard it before they saw it, the high-pitched, furious whine of a two-stroke engine. A motorcycle, matte black, shot out of the alley's mouth. No headlights. The rider, masked in a black helmet, popped the front wheel, blocking the exit. He swung something heavy, a metal pipe meant to connect with Cassian's head. Cashin's reaction was not to fight, it was to shield. "In," he yelled. He grabbed Lila by the waist, his grip like steel, and spun her. He shoved her hard into the dark, narrow gap between the cafe's brick wall and the neighboring dry cleaner. The motorcycle screamed past, the pipe scraping sparks against the wall where Cassian had been a second before. The rider cursed, spun the bike around, and vanished into the street traffic. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of Lila's harsh breathing. She was pinned against the rough brick, the smell of dust in her nose. Cassian was pressed against her, his body a solid wall, his arm still braced across her chest, caging her in. His head was turned, listening to the alley. She was trapped. His heat was immediate, radiating through her thin shirt. She could feel the hard planes of his chest, the solid muscle of his abdomen. Her hands were trapped between them, flat against his t-shirt. Lila's heart was a frantic bird, hammering against her ribs. And under her palm, she felt his. It was not calm. It was not slow. It was a heavy, powerful thud, 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 a war drum answering her panic, beating in perfect, sudden time with her own. They stood there for a second. Two. Hearts synchronized in the dark, breathing in the same small space. The danger just outside. The car Cassian had stolen, a beaten-up domestic sedan from a long-term airport parking lot, finally died at a two-pump gas station outside 29 Palms, near the entrance to Joshua Tree. They hadn't spoken since the alley, the echo of their synchronized heartbeats filling the silence. They checked into the only motel visible, a single-story crescent of peeling paint called the Dusty Arroyo. They paid in cash, the last of Lila's tip money from a week ago, and took room 7, the one furthest from the road. The room was small, suffocating. The air conditioner was broken, and a single ceiling fan wobbled, clicking with each rotation. It did nothing to move the heat. It just provided a soundtrack to the oppression. The air smelled of stale cigarettes, bleach, and faintly, through the cracked window, the electric, clean scent of rain on dry sand from a storm miles away. Cassian jammed the flimsy wooden chair under the doorknob. Lila dropped her bag on the stained carpet. They were trapped. "He'll have men sweeping every main road to Santa Fe," Cassian said, his voice rough. He was staring out the grimy window, watching the highway. "The motorcycle was a message, to see if I was alone. Now they know I'm not." "So they're hunting us," Lila said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. The springs groaned in protest. "Because of me." "They're hunting me," Cashin corrected, turning from the window. "You're just a complication they will remove." The finality of his words hung in the hot, small room. Lila shivered. He shed his light jacket, revealing the gray t-shirt, now damp with sweat. The raw power she had felt in the alley was still there, but now, under the single buzzing yellow bulb, she saw the exhaustion. The lines around his eyes were deeper, the scar on his side a visible ridge as he moved. He sat on the other bed, a chasm of 3 feet between them. He unwrapped the half loaf of bread they'd bought at the gas station and tore it in two, handing her a piece. They ate in silence. The bread was dry, tasteless. It was the most intimate meal of Lila's life. "You've run before," he said, not a question. Lila nodded, staring at the bread. "My whole life. Celeste. She called it seeing new places. We never stayed anywhere more than 6 months. New towns, new last names, new schools. I was always the new girl, the weird girl who lived in a trailer with her paranoid grandmother. I learned to pack one bag, to never make friends, to look for the exit in every room." She looked at him. "Just like you." Cassian's gaze was heavy. "I never learned to pack. I learned to own the room, to build a fortress and sit on top of it. I thought it kept me safe. My father built a throne of bones, and I inherited it. I'm just so tired. I'm tired of the weight of it." It was a confession that stunned her, a crack in the marble facade. He was not a king. He was a prisoner of the crown. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. An unknown Wi-Fi network, weak but present, a video call request from Sarah Montoya. Her hands fumbled. She hit accept. Celeste's face filled the screen. She was bone thin, her skin like parchment, an oxygen tube clipped to her nose, but her eyes were still sharp, still burning with the same fire Lila saw in the old photograph. "Lila," Celeste's voice was a rasp. "You are in motion. I knew it. He found you." "Grandma, He is not the danger, baby girl, not the only one." Celeste was struggling, her breath catching. The pier. It wasn't just the cartel. It was the conclave. They were buying Aurelio, or they were burying him. Both, maybe. The conclave. Cassian was off his bed in an instant, kneeling by the phone, his face entering the frame. Who is the conclave? Celeste's eyes widened, recognition and old, deep fear warring in her gaze. She saw him. "A ghost," she whispered. Then her eyes focused on Lila, urgent. A cabal. They own everyone. The cartel, the syndicates, the WIB. They play both sides. Lila, don't trust? Conclave." The feed sputtered, a nurse's voice in the background, sharp, and the call cut. Silence. The fan clicked, thwack click, thwack click, "A cabal that plays both sides," Cassian said, rising to his feet. He moved back to the window. It would explain the blind musician. It would explain the leak to the cartel. It would explain the WIB agent in the restaurant. He went still. "Lila, headlights, no?" Lila joined him, peering through a slit in the blinds. A large, dark pickup truck, lifted, no license plates, was idling at the gas station across the street. The El Coyote. It wasn't getting gas. It was watching. "They're not WIB, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "They're conclave. They're sweepers." The truck's engine revved once, a clear, predatory threat. "The back window," Cassian said. "It's painted shut, but the frame is rotten." He grabbed his jacket. "When I move, you have 10 seconds. He snatched the keys to the dying sedan from the desk. He kicked the chair away from the door and threw it open. He sprinted, low and fast, to the car. He jammed the key in, and the sedan's headlights flashed on, bright in the desert twilight. The pickup truck's doors flew open. 2 men, large and armed, jumped out. "Now, Lila," Cassian roared. He wasn't running to the car, and he was running past it. He used the sedan's lights as a decoy and sprinted away from the motel, into the deep shadows behind the El Coyote gas station. Lila didn't hesitate. She hit the rotten window frame with her elbow. The wood splintered. She scrambled through, tearing her shirt, and landed on the sand behind the building. She ran, following the shadow she had just seen. The truck's tires squealed, but they were in the dark, heading for the open desert. They huddled behind a rusted water tank, hearts pounding. From here, they could hear the angry shouts, and they could hear something else, a radio. The AM station in the gas station's office turned up loud. Repeating this bulletin. "The Western Integrity Bureau is seeking Cassian Vieri for questioning. Vieri is considered a person of interest in illegal transactions with a shadowy financial group known only as the Conclave. Lila looked at Cassian. His face was granite. It's a trap, he said, the realization dawning. The WIB aren't just compromised. They're the Conclave's hammer. They leak my name. They tie me to their own organization. Now the syndicate hunts me as a traitor, and the feds hunt me as a criminal. He was well and truly alone, hunted by all sides. Not alone, Lila said, her voice shaking. She was breathing hard, her wrist throbbing where she'd hit the frame. The cheap bandage she'd put on after a burn at the restaurant was soaked. Lila... No, she ripped the dirty bandage off, her movements sharp, angry. She lied my whole life. Cassian looked. Beneath the bandage, high on the inside of her wrist, was not a burn. It was a small, perfect mole, the color of dark wine, shaped exactly like a teardrop. He froze. He had seen that mark only once before, in a dusty ledger in his uncle's hand. The Comet bloodline. He breathed. It was a myth, a story told about the original founders. What is it? Lila demanded, her hand still raised. Cassian's hand came up, slow. His fingers, calloused and sure, did not go to her wrist. They traced, very lightly, the shape of the mole, a touch so gentle it was a question. It was the first time he had touched her without force, without urgency. The air, already thick with heat, became electric. It was a static charge, a sandstorm building in the small space between them. His touch was hesitant, reverent. Her skin burned where he'd traced the mark. He met her eyes. The weariness was gone, replaced by a fierce, sudden clarity. It means you're not bait, he said, his voice raw. It means you're the key to whatever Aurelio and Celeste were planning. He finally, carefully, let his hand settle over hers. Not a grab, not a pull, a connection, his palm covering her wrist, the crescent comet tattoo just inches from the teardrop bloodline. They're in Santa Fe, Lila said, her voice small but hard. The Conclave, the WIB, they're all there. Yes, Cassian said, his grip tightening, linking their fingers. They'll be waiting for us. Yes, he held her gaze. We leave now. We go to Santa Fe. We go to Celeste. They were just another shadow moving across the high desert, one of 1,000 cars pushing east on the long, straight ribbon of Interstate 40. They had ditched the failed sedan and hot-wired a construction truck, but the truck was too slow, too visible. They'll be looking for this truck, Cassian said, his eyes never leaving the mirrors. They'll check every rest stop between here and Arizona. He was driving, his hands light on the wheel, a stark contrast to the tension in his shoulders. So what are we looking for? Lila asked, her own eyes glued to the side mirror. Not a car, a pattern, he said, his voice the low rumble of the engine. Anyone who exits when we exit, anyone who stays 2 miles back for more than 20 minutes, you don't just look, you listen, feel the rhythm of the traffic. You can smell a tail. They brake when you brake. Even on an open road, they're trying to sync with you. It smells like hot brakes. He was teaching her, his words stripping away her civilian innocence and replacing it with the sharp, cold knowledge of the hunted. In Gallup, New Mexico, he pulled off the main drag and into a dusty industrial park. He parked the truck behind a nondescript warehouse, tied in Ember Logistics. One of mine, and he said, cutting the engine. Clean, legitimate, or legitimate enough. Inside, a single, tired-looking man sat behind a metal desk. He didn't stand when Cassian entered, just nodded once and slid a set of keys and a thin folder across the desk. The canyon. It's deeper than you thought. The name at the top is Silas Crane. He runs Silvertine Canyon like a private kingdom. They call him a philanthropist. The most dangerous kind, Cassian said. He opened the folder. Inside were 2 new driver's licenses, flawless forgeries, and a registration for the car outside, a gray, boring, utterly anonymous sedan. As they crossed the state line into New Mexico, the high desert opening up around them, Lila's phone, which she thought was dead, buzzed. A single text. He's lying to you. Silas Crane doesn't exist. It's Vieri's own trap. She stared at it and the number was blocked. It was the musician again, or the WIB, or the conclave. It didn't matter. The walls were closing in, and every hand looked like a fist. She deleted the text, but the poison remained. They stopped for gas at a lonely station outside of Grant's. Cassian went inside to pay, his eyes scanning the two other customers. Lila was pumping the gas, the nozzle cold in her hand, when a woman approached. She was plain, professional, in a sensible blue pantsuit. Lila Mora. Lila's hand tightened on the pump handle, her body tensing. "My name is Marin Cade." The woman discreetly flashed a badge. "WIB?" It was the same blue stamp from the envelope. "We know you're in danger. Vieri is compromised. He's been negotiating with the conclave for weeks. We're about to move on him." You're working with them," Lila stammered. "Celeste Mora is under our protection," Cade said, her voice dropping, sympathetic. "We're moving her to a secure facility, but Vieri's men are close. He's trying to get to her, to use her as leverage against us." She held out a small, black chip, no bigger than a quarter. "This is a tracker. Put it in his car, in his bag. We'll pick him up, and you and your grandmother will be safe. Guaranteed." Lila looked at the chip, then at the woman's cold, certain eyes. She remembered Cassian's scar. She remembered his voice, admitting his exhaustion, and she remembered the WIB's own bulletin, naming him a criminal. "No," Lila said. Cade's smile faltered. "Pardon." "I said no," Lila said, pulling the nozzle from the car. "I'm not a key, I'm not a pawn, and I'm not your bait." Cade's face hardened. "That's the wrong choice, kid. You're not choosing a side. You're just choosing to die with him." She turned and walked to her car, a standard government sedan, and drove away. When Cassian came out, Lila said nothing. The seed of doubt was no longer a seed. It was a thorny, suffocating vine. They drove until darkness fell, stopping at a dilapidated motel with a flickering vacancy sign. They took the end room. As Cassian worked the lock, a shadow detached itself from the carport. It happened in less than a second, a slender figure, all in black, moving with impossible, fluid grace. The attacker wasn't going for Cassian. They were going for Lila. A glint of steel, a knife. "Fire!" Cassian yelled. Lila didn't understand. The attacker, a woman with a pale, porcelain mask-like face, lunged. Lila stumbled back, hitting the motel room's exterior wall. Next to her head was a glass box in case of fire. She didn't think. She smashed the glass with her elbow, ignoring the pain, and grabbed the red fire extinguisher. The assassin, known in certain circles as the Orchid, raised her knife for a killing blow. Lila aimed the nozzle and squeezed. A thick cloud of white chemical foam hit the Orchid square in the face. The assassin choked, blinded, gasping, the knife clattering to the ground. In that instant, Cassian was on her. He didn't punch. He moved like a snake, coiling and striking, one arm locking the Orchid's elbow, the other twisting her wrist. A sickening pop echoed in the parking lot, followed by a strangled scream. He slammed her face first into the pavement, a knee in her back. They dragged her, sputtering and half-conscious, into the room. Cassian threw her onto the stained carpet. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice a low, brutal thing. The Orchid just spat a bloody chemical foam onto the floor. Cassian picked up the ice bucket. "You can tell me, or you can try breathing this stuff for the next 10 minutes. "Silas Crane," she choked out. "He sent me, but not to kill, to retrieve." "Retrieve what?" "The girl." The Orchid looked at Lila, her eyes burning with hate. "He wants the living gift, the key, Aurelio's data vault. Only the Comet bloodline can open it. He wants her alive." Lila Naiwani, who was pressing a towel to her bleeding elbow, froze. Her blood ran cold, then hot with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "A living gift, a key." She stalked forward, her voice shaking. "I am not a thing." Cassian put a hand on her shoulder, pushing her back gently, his eyes never leaving the assassin. He looked at the orchid, then at Lila. His face was a mask of cold resolve. "Listen to me," he said, his voice quiet, final. "Tell Silas Crane this. Anyone touches her again, they die." His phone buzzed, a secure text. He read it, his face going pale. Lila looked at him, her heart hammering. "What?" "It's from my man in Santa Fe," he said, showing her the screen. "Celeste is no longer at the clinic. She was moved. Urgent transport, an hour ago." "Moved where?" Lila whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. "A new location," Cassian said, his eyes locking with hers, the doubt and the danger and the strange, terrible bond between them solidifying. "San Miguel Hospice, just outside the city. A new location, a trap, or the only truth left." They did not stay at the motel. Cassian had bound the orchid with the room's television cable and left her for the local police to find, along with an anonymous tip about a disturbance. They were gone before the first siren cut the air, driving into the black, featureless heart of the New Mexico desert. He found it 2 hours later, a small, abandoned adobe casita set miles down a washboard dirt road, forgotten by time. The air was cold now, the high desert altitude stealing the day's heat. Inside, it was just one room, with a dirt floor and a small beehive-shaped fireplace in the corner. It was shelter. Cassian used a lighter to inspect the flue, then began to build a fire with the dry. Ancient wood stacked against the wall. Lila huddled on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. The towel from the motel still clutched in her hand. The adrenaline from the fight was gone, leaving a deep, trembling cold in its place. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the shock, from the realization that she was a living gift, a key. Cassian turned from the nascent fire. He saw her shaking. He took off his heavy jacket, the one he'd taken from the Tide and Ember warehouse, and moved toward her. He didn't drop it on her. He stopped, waiting for her to look up. He knelt and she flinched. He held the jacket open, a silent offering. Slowly, she leaned forward and he draped it over her shoulders. The material was heavy, still warm from his body, and smelled faintly of dust and something metallic and safe. He returned to the fire, coaxing the small flames into a steady, crackling blaze. The adobe room filled with a deep, orange glow. It was a warmth that felt older than the world. Lila watched him, his profile sharp against the dancing light, his movements economical and sure. He had killed, or come close to it, just to protect her, and then he had made her a fire. He sat on the other side of the small fireplace, his back against the rough wall. The silence stretched, filled only by the snap of the wood and the sound of the wind rising outside. The firelight caught his wrist, the crescent comets glowed, the ink stark against his skin. Lila looked down at her own wrist, at the teardrop-shaped mole, the so-called bloodline, 2 sides of a promise, 2 pieces of a puzzle, sitting by a fire in the middle of nowhere. They looked at each other, and for the first time, there was no danger, no chase. There was just the quiet and the heat, the look held, lasting longer than a single breath. He broke the silence. He rose on one knee and moved, not fast, but with purpose. Crossing the few feet of dirt floor that separated them, he knelt in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He raised a hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He did not. His fingers, calloused from things she did not want to know, touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't known she'd shed. The touch was impossibly gentle. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, his voice a low gravel, rough and soft at the same time. Lila looked into his eyes, which were dark in the firelight, reflecting the flames. She saw the killer. She saw the protector. She saw the man who was tired of his throne. She shook her head. No. Then, she did something that surprised them both. She lifted her hand, the one that was not bleeding, and placed it flat on his chest, right over his heart. It was a heavy, solid, powerful beat. Thud, thud, thud. It was dawning, and it was real. He watched her, his own breath catching. He leaned in, slowly. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then immediately back to her eyes. It was a question, a clear one. "May I?" Lila's heart hammered. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She leaned forward, just a fraction, closing the final inch. Yes. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not the desperate, frantic clash from the alley. It was slow. It was a search. His lips were firm, warm, and tasted faintly of the dry desert air. It was a kiss of absolute, terrifying respect. It deepened, and his hand moved from her cheek to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her, anchoring her. Her other hand came up, clinging to his shirt. Her own arms, as if by their own will, slid up his shoulders, her fingers finding the tense, knotted muscles of his neck. She clung to him, and with a small sigh that was half surrender, she felt the rigid wall of his body soften, the tension he had carried like armor, the bowstring that had been strung taut for 20 years, finally went slack. He pulled back, just enough for their foreheads to touch. They were breathing the same air, their hearts hammering in a frantic, shared rhythm. He kept his eyes closed, as if memorizing the moment. "Lila," he whispered. It was not a name. It was an oath. He guided her down, pulling her with him to lie on the hard-packed earth beside the fire, his jacket still wrapped around her. He did not let her go. He gathered her close, his arms a fortress, her head tucked under his chin. The firelight washed over them in waves of red and gold. Lila felt his hand find hers in the dark, his fingers lacing with hers, holding on tightly. She felt the rise and fall of his chest, the solid, steady beat of his heart against her ear. And for the first time since she was a child, she felt completely and utterly safe. The flames danced, reflecting on their skin. This was not a conquering. It was a truce, a quiet surrender to a force more powerful than the Conclave, or the W-Ib, or the ghosts of Pier Nova. It was two hearts, beating as one in the dark. After a long time, a quiet stillness settled over them. The fire burned low, reduced to glowing embers. Lila smiled, a soft, sleepy expression, and burrowed closer, her hand clutching the front of his shirt. Cassian watched the last of the flames. He found an old, threadbare blanket on a nearby shelf, and gently, so as not to wake her, he covered them both. He lifted her hand, the one with the comet bloodline, and pressed a kiss to the back of it, a gesture not of possession, but of protection, a promise. When the sun rose, they would go to Santa Fe. They would face the trap, the hospice, and the truth. They would go together. San Miguel Hospice was not a hospital. It was a final whisper, built of traditional adobe. It melted into the pinon-dotted hills outside Santa Fe, a place of profound, quiet beauty and irreversible endings. The air smelled of juniper smoke and cold, high desert chaparral. Cassian had cleared the room, using a non-existent authority that his presence simply manufactured. Lila was alone with Celeste. The room was warm, the lights low. Celeste Mora, propped against a half-dozen pillows, looked like a small, dry leaf. Only her eyes, dark and sharp, were alive. "He's alive," Celeste rasped. The words were stones dropped into a still pool. Lila, checking the oxygen saturation monitor, froze. "Aurelio," Celeste said, her voice gaining a strange, papery strength. "He's alive." Cassian was guarding the hallway, but he heard. He went utterly still, his back to the room, a statue of carved granite. He died at Pier Nova," Lila whispered, her voice catching. "The fire." "He set the fire," Celeste corrected, a terrible clarity in her gaze. It wasn't the cartel that day. It was the Conclave. They were absorbing. They wanted his networks, his routes. He couldn't fight them, so he chose to disappear. He faked his own death. She reached out, her fingers like bird talons, and grasped Lila's wrist, the one with the teardrop mole. He had a failsafe, A vault. Everything the Conclave needed, everything he had, he locked it. He couldn't trust his own bloodline, but he trusted ours. Lila stared at her hand. The bloodline. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. The first Lila had seen. That mole. It's a key. A second-generation biometric scan. Aurelio. He was brilliant and he was cruel. He made you the lock. She choked on a sob. A dry, racking sound. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry. I spent 22 years running, trying to keep you a secret, trying to keep you worthless to them, but he made you. He made you a mandatory bait. Cassian turned from the doorway, his face a mask of cold, dawning horror. He finally understood. The pursuit. The orchid. A living gift. He wants her. Alive. They weren't hunting Lila because she was with him. They were hunting her because she was the key. The door to the room opened, pushed wide. Not a nurse. It was Agent Marin Cade, her face impassive, her sensible blue suit looking utterly alien in the quiet room. 2 male agents, broad and silent, flanked her. The perimeter is secure, Mr. Vieri, Cade said, her eyes taking in Celeste, then Lila, then the tense, murderous posture of Cassian. I appreciate you leading us here. You, Cassian growled, are compromised. The Conclave is a cancer, Cade said, her voice sharp, ignoring him. My organization, the WIB, is rotten with it. We're building a shadow case, trying to cut it out, that vault Aurelio left. That's our linchpin. It's the only thing that can burn Crane. She looked at Lila. We need the key. We offer a deal. Help us open that vault and Celeste gets full federal protection. Witness protection, the best doctors in the world, a clean slate, a new, safe life. You leaked my name to the press, Cassian said, his voice a low vibration. You set me up as the target. I did, Cade admitted, to draw the Conclave's sweepers out, to see who they sent. It worked. Cassian looked at Lila, his eyes a warning. Do not trust her. Lila looked at her grandmother, frail, dying and trapped. She needs doctors, Lila said, her voice shaking but firm. She needs to be safe. We take the deal. Lila, no, Cassian commanded. Yes, Lila shot back, standing up. I'm not leaving her to die in a trap. We take the deal. Celeste was fumbling at her own neck. She pulled a thin, tarnished silver chain from beneath her gown. On it hung a single, beautifully carved pendant, a crescent-shaped comet. It's not just a vault. Baby girl, she whispered, her voice urgent. It's a map. The other half. Aurelio has the other half. She pressed the cool metal into Lila's palm. Silvertine Canyon, the old Black Comet wine cellars. It's buried under the... Thank you. Celeste, one of Cade's agents said. He was the one by the window. He was smiling. He raised his handgun, not at Cassian, but at Marin Cade. Agent Cade, you're relieved of duty. Conclave protocols are now in effect. We'll take the key from here. Traitor, Cade yelled, drawing her own weapon. The room exploded. It was not a prolonged battle. It was 3 seconds of chaos, a deafening crack. The window behind the agent shattered, a second pop. Cade screamed, a sharp, angry sound, and collapsed, clutching her shoulder. Cassian didn't join the fight. He moved for the only thing that mattered. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from the chair, lunged for the bed, and in one motion, scooped the frail, 100-pound Celeste into his arms. Lila, move, he roared. The traitorous agent was turning his gun on Cassian, the primary target. Lila did not run. Cade was on the floor, her face pale, blood pouring from a wound high on her arm, arterial. She was 2 minutes from bleeding out. In here, Lila screamed at the agent. He turned, confused. Lila grabbed the heavy stainless steel water pitcher from the bedside table and hurled it at his head. It struck him in the temple. A heavy, wet thud. He staggered, disoriented. In that second, Lila was on her knees next to Cade, ripping open a sterile gauze pack from the supply cart. Press down, she commanded, her voice the sharp, clear tone of a paramedic. She shoved Cade's own hand onto the wound. "Press hard or you will die." She was buying them a shield, buying them seconds. Cassian, Celeste held tight to his chest, paused at the door, watching her, in the midst of gunfire. With a federal agent bleeding at her feet, she was not panicking. She was commanding. She was working. A surge of respect, so fierce it almost choked him, filled his chest. "Lila now," he yelled. "Go!" Cade gasped, her hand white on her own shoulder. Lila ran. She grabbed the comet pendant from the floor and sprinted after Cassian, down the service hallway and out into the biting, cold Santa Fe night. As they piled into the anonymous sedan, Celeste was coughing, her breath a thin, terrible rattle. She looked up at Cassian, her eyes wide with a final, desperate terror. I lied," she wept, her small hand clutching his shirt. "One last time. His name." "It doesn't matter," Cassian said, his eyes scanning the parking lot for threats. "It does," she cried. It wasn't Vieri. That was his father, his mother's name. The one we were going to take. The one I was supposed to meet him with." She dissolved into a final, heartbreaking sob, the confession of a life lived in waiting, an appointment missed for 25 years. His name was Aurelio Valente. Cassian's foot slipped off the brake. The car jerked. Valente, not a Vieri. The name of the very family his father had gone to war with. The name that started the purge. Lila looked at the pendant in her hand, the key. She looked at Cassian, his face pale, his world visibly shattering. She realized the truth. That vault didn't just contain the Conclave's secrets. It contained the real history of the Pier Nova fire. Opening it wouldn't just burn Silas Crane. It would incinerate the entire legacy of the low-tide syndicate. It would destroy everything Cassian was... And she was the one holding the match. Silvertine Canyon was a scar in the earth, a place the desert was trying to reclaim. Night fell over it not as a blanket, but as a judgment. The Black Comet wine cellar was built into the canyon's northern wall, a monument to a forgotten tycoon's folly, now silent and dark. Their group was small, wounded and desperate. Cassian and Lila, Marin Cade, her left arm in a crude sling, her face pale and tight with fury. Her two loyalists, a broad, silent man named Jax and a thin, wired woman named Reyes, were all that was left of her task force. Celeste was gone. Silas Crane's men had been a secondary wave, hitting the safe house Cassian had moved her to while the firefight at the hospice was still raging. They had her. And now, the cellar was not just a target, it was their only bargaining chip. "Aurelio built this place," Cassian said, his voice a low vibration in the cold air. He touched the heavy, iron-strapped oak door. He was obsessed with the analog. He said computers were a betrayal waiting to happen. Jax and Reyes, armed with pry bars, forced the lock. The hinges screamed in protest, opening onto a vast, descending staircase. The air was cold, smelling of damp earth, fermented grapes, and rust. Their flashlights cut weak cones into the oppressive darkness. The main cellar floor was a cathedral of shadow, lined with massive, rotting wine casks. "Plates," Reyes whispered, her light fixed on the floor. "Pressure sensors, old school. See the lines in the dust." "We don't walk," Cassian said. He pointed up. "We climb." He moved to the nearest wine rack, a 20-foot-high structure of heavy oak, and began to climb. Moving from cask to cask, the others followed. A silent, high-stakes game of shadows, their hands gripping dusty, splintered wood, their feet finding purchase on the curved bellies of barrels. They crossed the main hall and reached the far side a steel door. "This one's different," Cade said, her good hand resting on her sidearm. The door was modern, but the defenses were ancient. A heavy, dual-tumbler mechanical lock. Jax and Cassian worked on it, shoulder to shoulder, a shared, tense silence between them. The tiny click-click-click of their tools echoing in the vault. "It's not enough," Cassian grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "There's a biometric failsafe." He stepped back. He looked at Lila. "He made you the key." Lila stepped forward, her heart hammering. There was no keypad, no screen, just a round, polished copper plate, dull in the flashlight beams. She pressed her palm against it. Nothing. "The bloodline," Cassian said, his voice soft. "Your wrist." Lila took a breath. She turned her arm over, pressing her inner wrist, the small, teardrop-shaped mole against the cold metal. For a long second, nothing. Then a heavy thud from within the wall, a hiss of pressurized air. The heavy steel door groaned, then clicked open. The sound like a coffin lid sliding on stone. They entered. The beams of their flashlights found shelves, but not of wine. It was an archive. Hundreds of black hi-fi tape reels. Dozens of thick, leather-bound ledgers. Maren Cade let out a shaky breath, her flashlight beam dancing. She grabbed a ledger, her one good hand flipping the pages. Harmonia Group, Solaris Holdings, the Silver Tide Foundation. It's all here. Her voice was filled with a terrible awe. His charity transfers, the offshore accounts, the bribes, this is the entire Conclave West blueprint. A loud, piercing screech of static erupted from an old intercom speaker on the wall. They all flinched, guns and lights snapping to the sound. A voice filled the tomb-like room. It was smooth, amused, and utterly confident. A beautiful little family reunion, but you seem to be missing a few people. Silas Crane. "I will make this simple." Silas's voice echoed. "A trade. You have my ledgers. I have your grandmother." Lila's stomach clenched. Cassian's hand balled into a fist, his knuckles white. "Trade the data for Celeste," Silas continued, his voice calm, as if discussing a business merger. "A clean exchange. Oh, and just to prove I have the matching set." A click, a feedback whine, then a new sound, a pained, rasping groan, a man's voice, thin and weak. "Celeste, don't." Cassian slammed his free hand into the shelving, the tapes rattling. "Aurelio," he choked out, the name of a wound. "He's weak, Cassian," Silas mocked, "but he's alive, for now. A guest at my little retreat, Greywater Lagoon, at dawn. Bring me my books. Come alone." The speaker clicked off. The silence that returned was heavier, more suffocating than before. Cassian was shaking, his rage a palpable, silent thing. He began pulling ledgers from the shelves, stuffing them into an old canvas bag. "We go. We make the trade. Then I burn him to the ground." "No." Maren Cade stepped in front of him, her gun drawn, her face a mask of desperate duty. "This is evidence. This is the case. It's bigger than your family, Vieri. We cannot trade this." "He has my family," Cassian roared, his own weapon in his hand in an instant, the two of them locked in a standoff. "Stop!" Lila's voice was a whip crack, cutting through the anger. They both turned, stunned, to look at her. She was pale, but her eyes were twin flames. "She's right," Lila said, nodding at Cade. "We can't trade the data." She turned to Cassian. "And he's right. We are not sacrificing people. Ever." "What's the play, then, key-bearer?" Cade snapped. "We play his game," Lila said, her mind racing. The years of running, of anticipating, of surviving, all focusing into one sharp point. We rescue the people, then we release the data. We do both. She looked at the shelves. He wants his books, we'll give him books. They split. Cade and her two loyalists began packing the real ledgers and tapes into their evidence bags. A grim, methodical harvest. Cassian and Lila moved to the outer cellar, grabbing identical-looking blank ledgers from a collapsed office desk, stuffing them into a matching canvas bag. Reyes found the exit, a heavy loading dock door that led to a platform. Parked on it was a rusted, ancient flatbed truck, the kind once used to haul wine barrels. The keys were in the ignition. On the dusty flatbed, Lila used her finger to draw a map of the road to Greywater. He'll be watching the main approach. There's a wooden service bridge at Checkpoint 3. We'll be in this truck, with the fake data. You'll be right behind us, in your car, with the real data. She drew an X under a crude drawing of the bridge. The comet switch. We'll be on the bridge. You'll be under it. We drop the fake bag. You swap it for the real one. He'll be watching us, not what's happening below. Cassian looked at the drawing, then at her. The respect in his eyes was absolute. Cade nodded, her face grim. It's insane. It's high risk, low percentage. I love it. Let's go, Cassian said, sliding into the driver's seat of the old truck. He held the door for Lila. Dawn is coming. Greywater Lagoon was not a lagoon. It was a chemical dump, a graveyard for ships. Hidden in the toxic fog of a failed industrial estuary, dawn did not break. It seeped, a dull gray light that revealed the rust and the oily, still water. Silas Crane stood on a central, rotting dock, wearing a pristine white suit, a man of pure control in a world of decay. The psychological torture was precise. Celeste was visible, shivering inside a small, glass-walled observation cabin on the dock, and just below her, tied to the massive, raised propeller of a dry dock tugboat, was a man. He was skeletal, his hair white, his body ravaged, but he was alive. Aurelio Valente. He likes his theater, Cassian growled, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of the ancient truck. They were parked 500 yards away, the engine ticking as it cooled. Lila said nothing. Her hand was on the canvas bag of fake ledgers at her feet. Cade is in position, Cassian said, checking his phone. We go, we make the trade. The moment he has the bag, Cade's team moves in, and we get the hostages. They got out, walking into the open. The comet switch is off, Lila said, her voice tight. There's no bridge. There's no cover. This is a trap. It's the only play we have, Cassian said. They reached the dock. Silas smiled, a wide, predatory gesture. The lovers arrive, and the key? Wonderful. Marin Cade and her two agents, Jax and Reyes, emerged from the fog on their left flank, guns holstered, carrying the real evidence bag. The deal was alone, Silas chided, his eyes landing on Cade. The deal just changed, Cade said, her voice hard. You get the data, we get the hostages, and you surrender, Silas. Silas laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. Oh, Marin, you were always so naive, weren't you, Jax? Jax, Cade's broad-shouldered loyalist, suddenly stiffened. He unslung the real evidence bag from Reyes's shoulder. Silas sends his regards, Agent. And in one fluid motion, he drew his weapon, not on Silas, but on Marin Cade. The deal vaporized. Reyes stared, betrayed. Cade's face crumpled in disbelief. No, Reyes yelled, drawing her own gun. Jax fired twice without looking, and Reyes went down, the real ledgers spilling from the bag at her feet. Jax turned his weapon, the barrel swinging past Cade, aiming directly at the most valuable asset in the field. He was aiming at Lila. No. It was not a word. It was a roar. Cassian was not a man. He was a force of nature. He threw himself sideways, a full-body tackle, shoving Lila off the dock and into the mud below. The world exploded in a single deafening crack. Lila landed hard, the impact knocking the wind from her. She looked up. Cassian was still on the dock, on his knees, his hand clamped to his side, his face a mask of agony. A dark, blossoming stain was spreading over his shirt. A scream tore from Lila's throat, high and raw, echoing across the dead water. Cassian! Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely push herself up, but her eyes were dry. The terror was too cold for tears. On the dock, chaos. Jax was trying to retrieve the scattered ledgers. Silas was laughing, watching the drama unfold. Marin Cade, her face white, her career ending, her entire operation in flames, looked at her last agent, the traitor. She did not hesitate. She did not read him his rights. She raised her firearm, her arm perfectly steady, and shot Jax twice in the chest. She broke every rule in the book, choosing a person over the protocol. Aurelio, seeing Cassian fall, strained against the ropes on the propeller, a terrible animal sound rising in his throat. Cassian, he choked out, his voice a rasp of disuse. "My boy, I left you in the dark. I'm sorry. I left you." It was a confession, the truth that had waited 2 generations. Cassian, bleeding, looked at his uncle, and his expression was not anger. It was a painful, terrible understanding. The gunfire was the signal. This was the comet switch. Lila scrambled back onto the dock. Ignoring the weapons, she ran to the truck, not away. She grabbed the emergency flare from the cab and a small, red tank from the toolbox. She sprinted to an old, rusted wine barrel on the dock, one she had seen on the approach, one Cassian had pointed to. She jammed the flare into the bunghole. The barrel, pre-filled with diesel from the truck, erupted. Not an explosion. A whoosh, a massive, impenetrable wall of thick, black smoke instantly enveloped the entire dock. "Breathe," she screamed. Through the smoke, she found the glass cabin. She smashed the lock with the base of the fire extinguisher. She dragged Celeste out. A bundle of bones. The woman was blue, choking on the chemical fog. Lila shoved the small oxygen tank into her hands. "Breathe! Grandma, breathe!" The smoke began to clear, shredded by the morning wind. Silas Crane was no longer laughing. He was standing, his white suit stained with soot, his eyes burning. He moved. He was faster than Cassian, faster than Cade, faster than anyone. He seized Lila from behind, his arm a steel bar around her waist. He dragged her backwards, spinning her to face the dock. A long, thin knife appeared from his sleeve, the tip pressing cold against the skin of her throat. "The key," he hissed in her ear, his breath hot, his control finally breaking. "There is a secondary vault. The bloodline is the key. Open it now." Lila was frozen, the sharp sting of the blade at her throat. Cassian was on one knee, his gun raised, but his hand was shaking. The shot impossible. Everything hung on a single, terrible thread. Lila locked eyes with Cassian. She was terrified, but her gaze was clear. She lifted her left hand as if in surrender, near her face. Her fingers were trembling. Then, with a quick, deliberate motion, she pressed her index and middle finger together and touched them to her collarbone. A V shape, a 2-fingered sign. The comet? Silas saw the movement. "No tricks," he roared, tightening his grip, the knife breaking the skin. The knife descended. The world was cut in half by a sound, a deafening, shattering honk of a massive freighter's horn, impossibly close. And from the water, a new, thick cloud of white smoke erupted, swallowing them all. The horn was not a boat, it was a decoy. The second cloud of white smoke erupted from a canister Marin Cade had rolled onto the dock, a military-grade smokescreen. The world dissolved into white blindness. Silas roared, slashing the knife wildly, but Lila was already gone. Cassian, fueled by a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, launched himself forward, ignoring the fire in his side. He didn't go for a weapon, he went for the arm. He slammed his full weight into Silas, his uninjured shoulder connecting with the man's ribs. The knife clattered. Cassian locked his arms around Silas's, a brutal, close-quarters hold. Silas, bigger and unhurt, slammed an elbow back. Breaking Cassian's grip, he lunged for the fallen knife. Lila had rolled, not run. She came up on her knees, her eyes burning from the smoke. She saw Silas reaching. She didn't think. She launched herself at his legs, not as a brawler, but as a lever. She hooked her arm behind his knee, just as Cassian had taught her to read a room's balance, and threw her entire weight sideways. Silas's center of gravity vanished. He crashed to the dock, a howl of rage escaping his lips. The smoke began to clear, revealing Marin Cade. She was not in the fight. She was standing by her fallen agent's body, a satellite link in her good hand. The real data, the ledgers and tapes, were connected. "You're too late, Silas," she said, her voice carrying over the water. "The data isn't being seized. It's being broadcast." A live, unencrypted stream, straight into the WIB's central server. The firewall was down, the charity transfers, the Harmonia Group, the entire network. It was all going public, a digital bomb detonating in the heart of the conclave, Phones buzzed, alarms rang, the conclave, exposed, began to eat its own. On the other side of the dock, the fight was over. Lila scrambled to Cassian, who had collapsed, his back against a piling. His face was gray. "Hey," she whispered, her hands finding the wound, pressing down, her voice shaking. "Stay with me. You don't get to do that." He just looked at her, his eyes full of a pained, desperate gratitude. A groan came from the propeller. Aurelio Valente was fading. Cassian, holding Lila's hand for balance, dragged himself to his feet. He staggered to his uncle. "I left you," Aurelio whispered, his eyes clouded, searching Cassian's face. "The fire. I had to choose, the vault, or you. I chose the legacy." "You left me in the dark," Cassian said, his voice a raw whisper. "I'm sorry." Aurelio's hand, skeletal and weak, fumbled with his own. He pulled a heavy, tarnished ring from his finger, a single, carved comet. "I tried to turn the violence into a shore." He pressed the ring into Cassian's hand. A haven. He looked past Cassian, at Lila, and a faint, peaceful smile touched his lips. "Celeste," he breathed, and was gone. Cassian stood there, the ring in his hand, and for the first time since he was a child, he did not fight the grief. He did not hide. He wept. Silent tears carving paths through the grime on his face. "Heart's failing," Cade yelled. Lila snapped her head around. Celeste was on the dock, her body still, the oxygen mask fogged. Lila sprinted to her side, ripping the mask off. No breath. "No, you don't!" Lila screamed, her training taking over. She tilted her grandmother's head back, pinched her nose, and sealed her mouth over the old woman's, breathing for her. 1, 2. She laced her fingers. "Come on, Grandma, come on." She began compressions, sharp and rhythmic, forcing the heart to remember. 1 and 2 and 3 and a violent, wet cough. Celeste's eyes flew open, terrified, alive. She gasped, her hands flying to Lila's. "Baby girl." They clung to each other, the two comet tattoos separated by a lifetime, now pressed together under the gray light of rescue sirens. It was not over. Silas Crane, his face a mask of pure, reptilian hatred, was on his feet. He ran, not to fight, but to the tugboat. He was holding a small, silver detonator. "If I burn," he screamed, "you all burn with me." The boat was wired. "Lila, the valve," Cassian yelled, pointing. Lila saw it, a large red wheel on the dock, connected to the dry dock seawater intake, the emergency release. She spun the wheel, her muscles screaming, with a groan of tortured metal. The valve opened. The gray water, oily and black, surged into the dry dock basin. It hit the hull of the tugboat with the force of a battering ram, the water rising instantly. The explosives, soaked and shorted, were useless. Silas stood on the deck, a king of a rapidly shrinking, sinking island, his detonator clicking uselessly. Cassian walked to the edge of the dock. He did not raise a gun. He uncoiled a heavy, thick anchor cable. He waited until the water was high enough, and with a single, practiced throw, he lassoed the main cleat, trapping Silas to his own failed monument. He did not choose vengeance. He chose justice. The resolution was not a news story. It was a series of quiet changes. Cassian Vieri, using the ring and the name Aurelio Valente, dissolved the violent arm of the low-tide syndicate. He pivoted its assets, its logistics, its entire structure into a new, legitimate organization. He called it the Comet Haven Foundation, a fully funded, semi-official partner to the new Western Integrity Bureau, specializing in witness protection and asset extraction. Marin Cade, having survived her own organization's purge, took the helm of the new West Coast Integrity Unit. Her first unofficial act was to lose every piece of paper that mentioned Lila Mora. She was an ally, now without a title. In East Los Angeles, the first recipients of the Celeste Line Scholarship began their studies in nursing and community social work. The azure quill was repaired, the storm damage was gone, the impossible glass replaced, stronger than before, the rooftop, once a place of danger, was now just a place. The moon was a silver disk over the dark, calm Pacific. Lila stood by the rail, the sound of the waves a familiar, gentle rhythm. She heard him approach, she turned, and Cassian was there. He was no longer a king. He was just a man. He wore his scar. He wore his new purpose. He stopped, a few feet from her. Lila stepped forward. She raised her hand, not to his chest, but to his wrist, her fingers, gentle. Traced the outline of the crescent comet chain. He covered her hand with his own, his thumb finding the teardrop mole on her skin. He leaned in, his eyes asking the question. She gave him the answer, rising to meet him. The kiss was slow. It was not the desperate search in the adobe or the panicked heat in the alley. It was a known quantity. It was salt and sea air and the scent of a future. It was a promise kept. They held each other, two survivors, their tattoos inches apart, their hearts beating in the same steady rhythm. Lila leaned back, her head resting on his shoulder, and looked up at the sky. "We weren't born under the same sky," she whispered, "but we chose the same constellation." Cassian's arm tightened around her, pulling her impossibly closer. He looked from the stars, down to her. "And from now on," he said, his voice low and certain, "it leads." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Comment below to say hello, share your thoughts, and connect with us. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.